Hello, and welcome to the Alabama Public Health Training Network. I'm Brandon Vaughn with the Alabama Department of Public Health. Thank you for joining us today for our program focusing on employee safety while responding to COVID-19. If you have a question about anything being discussed today, please call or email during our broadcast. The phone number and email address are on your screen now and will appear again later in the program. Also, the handouts and evaluation are available online. You will need to register for this program in order to access those materials. Continuing education credits have been approved for nurses and social workers for this program. In order to receive credit for this training, you must watch the entire program, then complete and return your sign-in sheet and evaluation. While content may continue to be relevant, CE credit will be only awarded for 2 years for social workers and nurses, expiring on September 30th, 2022. If you're watching this program on demand and want to receive a social work CE certificate, you will need to complete the social work test and send it in, along with your sign-in sheet and evaluation. If you're watching this program live, there is no social work test required. For social workers, if you're watching this program live, it qualifies for classroom hours. If you're watching on demand, it is considered non-classroom hours. Before we get started, I would like to introduce our presenters today. William Poe with Montgomery Fire Rescue, Carol Garrett, Cancer Prevention ACCCP Program Director with the Alabama Department of Public Health, Captain Lee Persky, Deputy Sheriff Captain Training Division Commander with the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office, and Kenneth Harrison, Workforce Development Program Coordinator with the Alabama Department of Public Health. Welcome to you all. I know we have a lot of important information to cover today, so let's go ahead and get started.
Hi, I'm William Poe, Lieutenant with Montgomery Fire Rescue, and today I'm here to talk to you about heat-related injuries. Let's dive right in. To understand heat-related injuries, we must first understand what hyperthermia is. Let's break the word down. Hyper means elevated. Thermia, thermal, think heat. Heat-related injuries are grouped under the name hyperthermia. The stages of hyperthermia are heat cramps, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. Heat cramps, this is the least serious form of heat-related injuries. Muscle spasms or cramps caused from an electrolyte imbalance to the muscles. Most commonly from overexertion in hot temperatures with excessive sweating, typically occurs in large muscle groups first, such as the abdominal muscles, gluteus muscles, and hamstrings. For those of you that exercise regularly, many of you have found yourself in this position before. Heat exhaustion is the second most severe. Extreme physical exertion in a hot, humid environment and can affect even an otherwise very fit individual. Prolonged and profuse sweating causes the body to lose large quantities of salt and water. When salt and water are not adequately replaced, blood circulation to the body diminishes, affecting the brain, heart, and the lungs. Skin is either normal or cool in temperature, usually pale or gray in color, and definitely sweaty. A person with heat exhaustion commonly has slight alterations in mental status, such as dizziness or fatigue. I would be very concerned if I saw a person like this out in the heat, sweating, slightly altered mentally. Think heat exhaustion. A heat stroke, now this is a very life-threatening medical emergency with a life mortality rate of up to 80%. This occurs when the heat-regulating mechanisms break down and become unable to cool the body sufficiently. Because no cooling takes place, the body stores increasingly more heat. Eventually, brain cells are damaged, causing permanent disability or death. This also possibly causes seizures. Skin will be hot and red in color. Typically, the body will no longer be sweating, but clothing may still be moist from sweating prior to the heat stroke. Heat stroke should always be considered when a person has a heat-related emergency coupled with unresponsiveness. As you can see here in this illustration, a construction worker, unconscious, it's in the heat, is a dire medical emergency. So what is extreme heat? In my opinion, extreme heat is defined as temperatures that are much hotter and/or humid than normal for any particular person. Most heat injuries occur during initial heat waves, or when a person travels from a cold region to a much hotter region due to a lack of acclimation. Acclimation is the process in which an individual adjusts to change in the environment, including cold, heat, and humidity. This allows people to maintain function and performance across a range of environmental conditions. This, however, may take up to a few weeks before a person is fully acclimated. There are some other predisposing factors. Exercise and strenuous activity can cause the loss of more than 1 liter of sweat per hour and increase heat production. Age. The elderly and infants have poor ability to regulate body temperature. People with pre-existing illnesses. These include, but not limited to, heart disease, kidney disease, thyroid gland disorders, obesity, diabetes, and vascular disease. Drugs and medications. These include alcohol, cocaine, amphetamines, diuretics, hallucinogens, many others. Many of these hamper sweating and increase heat production internally. Under normal circumstances, the body prevents hyperthermia in 2 ways. Radiation being the most dominant. This is the process of heat transfer from your body, which is normally plus or minus 98.6 degrees, to the environment. Thus, in hotter environments, this process has little to no effect. Radiation has the highest effect when temperatures are below 68 degrees, or room temperature. Evaporation accounts for the other 45% of your body preventing hyperthermia. As sweat is evaporated from your skin, it causes your skin to cool. The higher the humidity, the less the sweat evaporates. The chart on the following page breaks down the heat index. The higher the humidity, the hotter it feels. As we can see here, on the top it says temperature, degrees Fahrenheit, and to the left, you're looking at the relative humidity percentage. So on a typical Alabama day during the summer, 98 degrees is pretty common. Now we couple that with a relative humidity of 75%, and we end up with it feeling as if it's 134 degrees. This is extremely dangerous. So let's beat the heat. Extreme heat or heat waves occur when the temperature reaches extremely high levels, or when the combination of heat and humidity causes the air to become oppressive. This mostly affects children and elderly adults because their cooling mechanisms don't work as well, people who are constantly working outside in the hot summer months, and people with disabilities. We're often going to see this in houses with little to no AC, especially for your older patients and people with disabilities. We also see this oftenly in cars, when someone accidentally leaves their child in a car for an extended amount of time. And obviously construction work sites, also within the fire department, and any other job where you're consistently working outside. So as we prevent heat-related injuries, we're going to slowly acclimate ourselves to new environments. Again, this may take several weeks. We're going to wear loose-fitting, light-colored, and lightweight clothing. During extreme heat and humid days, stay inside of an air-conditioned environment. Schedule outdoor activities carefully. Choose outdoor times early in the morning or evening. Never leave anyone unattended in a vehicle, and this includes your pets. Stay informed. Continuously monitor the weather. Many sources are always available, including smartphone apps to newspapers. And always stay hydrated, but do this the right way. We need to avoid sugary drinks, caffeine, and alcohol. These can all cause dehydration. And don't just drink water. When you sweat, you lose minerals and sodium as well as water. The sodium and minerals can be consumed with food, tablets, and sports drinks. So if you're planning a long hike, bike ride, or marathon, you are susceptible to exercise-associated hyponatremia. Hypo being low, Na being sodium. This condition is caused from being active for long periods of time and consuming large amounts of water. This can cause life-threatening fluid in the lungs and the brain. Moderate water intake and ensure an adequate amount of sodium to help with prevention. So as we care for patients with heat-related injuries, let's first look at heat cramps. The first thing that you need to do with anyone that has a heat-related injury, always remove them from the environment. So remove the person from the heat source to a cool environment. If nothing else, move the person out of the sun and into the shade. Ensure adequate hydration. Give the affected person sips of low concentration salt water at the rate of 1/2 a glassful every 15 minutes. If possible, use a commercial product such as Gatorade with low sugar content. Apply moist towels to the person's forehead and over the cramping muscles. Heat exhaustion. This can cause very serious problems. Make sure you call 911. Then remove the person from the heat source to a cool environment, and again, if nothing else, move the person to the shade. Remove clothing to the level of the person's comfort. If possible, mist the person with water and fan them lightly. If available, place cold or wet compresses to the armpits and groin areas. Consider elevating the person's feet 8 to 12 inches. If the person is nauseated or vomiting, place the person on their side. This is called the recovery position, and this will help prevent aspiration. If you suspect a person of having a heat stroke, definitely call 911. This is a dire emergency. And again, remove the person from the heat source to a cool environment. If nothing else, move the person to the shade. Remove as much of the clothing as possible or reasonable. Pour tepid, not cold water, over their body. Cold water can cause shivering and be counterproductive. If possible, apply cold packs or wet compresses to the armpits, groins, and each side of the neck. Fan the person aggressively or direct an electrical fan at the person. Make sure you keep their skin wet. If a seizure does occur, move any objects that are around the person. Do not attempt to hold them down or restrain them. Continue cooling to the best of your ability. Other heat-related illnesses include sunburn and heat rash. Signs and symptoms of sunburn include painful, red, and warm skin. Treatment includes staying out of the sun until the sunburn heals. Put cool clothes on sunburned areas or take a cool bath. Use moisturizing lotions with aloe on sunburned areas. Do not deliberately break blisters. This can cause infections. Just for a tip, when buying sunscreen, look for sunscreens that say broad spectrum or UVA UVB protection on the label. Apply sunscreen of SPF 15 or higher 30 minutes prior to going into the sun. Heat rash are red clusters of small blisters that look like pimples on the skin. These are normally found on the neck, chest, groin, or in the elbow creases. Treatment includes, stay in a cool, dry place. Keep the rash dry. Use baby powder to soothe the rash. In summary, from this class, you should have a solid foundation of knowledge that will enable you to identify, prevent, and assist in treating a person with a heat-related injury or illness. Again, my name is William Poe with Montgomery Fire Rescue. Thank you for your time, and let's go save some lives.
Thank you, William. Next, we'll hear from Carol Garrett with the Alabama Department of Public Health. Carol?
Good afternoon. I'm Carol Garrett, the Program Director here at the Alabama Department of Public Health Comprehensive Cancer Control Program. And today I want to talk to you about sun safety and how it relates to skin cancer prevention. We are located here in the RSA Tower. And the purpose of this program is, of course, to support Cancer Coalition efforts. And we have a goal in mind is we want to actually reduce cancer incidence, morbidity, and mortality in Alabama. And we hope to do this through prevention, early detection, and surveillance. Our program, we are in year 4, and we are funded by the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. First thing I want to talk to you today is about skin cancer statistics. Current estimates are that 1 in 5 Americans will develop skin cancer in their lifetime. Now, if you're in a setting, if you would just count off, if there are 5 of you, then one person out of that group of 5, the chances are that they have a likelihood of developing skin cancer. Skin cancer is the most common form of cancer in the U.S., but it's also the most preventable. Now, there are 3 forms of skin cancer, but one type that is most common is melanoma. And it is the 3rd most common skin cancer, but it is the most deadly. It accounts for only 1% of skin cancers, but causes a large majority of skin cancer deaths. In 2019, it's estimated that over 1,400 new cases of melanoma will be diagnosed in Alabama. And actually, the numbers in 2020 have actually increased to over 1,500. We want to talk to you about skin cancer risk factors. First of all, a risk factor is any type of attribute or characteristic or exposure of an individual that actually increases their likelihood of developing a disease or injury. Now, as you look at the chart, you'll notice that there are different risk factors associated with skin cancer. Now, some of these risk factors can actually be prevented, and some actually cannot, like your family history, your hair color, or your eye color. You can't really do anything much about that. But prolonged sun exposure, that's something that you can do something about. And even those indoor tanning habits, we can control those. I want to go over a couple of important facts with you. You may be asking, well, how can I get skin cancer? The leading cause of skin cancer is chronic sun exposure. Exposure to UVA and UVB radiation from the sun, and also exposure from tanning beds and sun lamps. These are major causes of all 3 types of skin cancer, those that are listed on the screen. Now, the risk of melanoma, it actually increases as people age, but the average age of people, usually when diagnosed, is at age 65. Now, one thing about melanoma, it's also not uncommon among those younger than age 30. It's really most common in young adults, especially young women. Now, what can you do about this? We recommend early detection. Early detection of skin cancer is important, and it can actually save your life. And what you can do is, on a regular basis, we recommend at least once a month that you carefully examine all of your skin. And also talk to a doctor if you notice any type changes in like moles, or if you see the color of a mole or the size of a mole or a new spot appearing, then you need to talk to your doctor about that. But one of the easiest ways that you can prevent all of those cases of skin cancer that we mentioned earlier is to use sunscreen on a regular basis. And although that is a prevalent way to prevent, research has shown that only 14% of men and only 30% of women actually regularly put sunscreen on before going outside. A few more facts we want to share with you. Approximately 80% of all information we take in is received through the sense of sight. Now, most of you may be aware that the sun can damage your skin, but most people are actually not aware that it can damage your eyes as well. And extended exposure to UV rays, it has been linked to chronic eye diseases, including cataract, growths on the eye, corneal sunburn, and even eyelid cancer. Now, although it can take several years before you experience any of these type damaging effects, you need to be aware of what's going on and be cautious when protecting your eyes as well as your skin. So let's say that you're spending time a day out on the beach, or if you're doing those activities you love like skiing or boating, and you notice that your eyes feel a little tired or sore or have that gritty feeling, then you may have experienced what we call UV radiation exposure, and you need to get your eyes checked when that happens. But what can you do to protect your eyes? Make sure that you're wearing quality sunglasses, UV blocking contact lenses, and a wide-brimmed hat. You may ask yourself, well, who is at risk? Everyone is at risk, especially children. And the reason we say especially children, because they tend to spend a lot more time outdoors than adults. So it's very important that you are protecting children as well as yourself. Now we want to talk a little bit about prevention. Some everyday steps that you can take for sun safety. But first of all, we want to mention a smart sun exposure strategy. Not only wearing sunscreen, but you also need to seek shade and also wear protective clothing. And when you're applying sunscreen, it needs to be water resistant. And the reason it needs to be water resistant is you don't want it to wash away if you're swimming or you're sweating. And you need to use a sunscreen of an SPF of 30 or higher. And you need to wear it even on cloudy days, because UV rays from the sun can actually pass through clouds. And then you want to reapply it every 2 hours, and you may want to apply it a little bit more often if you're swimming or sweating. You need to wear protective clothing like long sleeves, long pants, a wide brim hat to cover your head. Now, I know a lot of people may wear sun visors, and that is great to protect your eyes and forehead, but a wide brim hat gives a little bit more coverage because it covers the top of your head as well. And then again, you need to be wearing sunglasses with UVA, 100% UVA, UVB protection. Another thing you need to do is seek shade, especially between the hours of 10 to 4, because these are the times where the sun's rays are the strongest. And then also you want to be using extra caution when you're near surfaces like water or sand or snow, because all of these surfaces actually reflect UV rays and can increase your risk of sunburn. And you need to get vitamin D. I know we can get vitamin D from the sun, but we recommend that you get it safely, either through a healthy diet or a vitamin supplement. And you will need to speak with your doctor. Avoid tanning beds, sun lamps, because these are all major causes of skin damage and wrinkles. And we talked about early detection. This chart just gives you just a summary of some things that you will be looking for, like changes in asymmetry or the border of those new moles or changing spots. You're looking for changes in color, the diameter, and even the evolution. Now, one thing I want to talk to you too about, there's myths out there that if I have darker skin, that I can't get skin cancer. That is not true. All people are at risk for skin cancer. And when skin cancer develops in people of color, it's often in a late stage when diagnosed. And this can be very deadly when the person has melanoma, because melanoma is a type of skin cancer that can actually spread rather quickly. So if found early, most skin cancers, including melanoma, can be cured. And on this slide, I just want to introduce you to, a lot of people don't know that Alabama actually has a law out there now. This law was actually passed in 2017 that allows for school students, both public and private, to actually apply sunscreen at school without the need for special permission from a doctor or a parent. Alabama is actually one of 23 states that has an actual sunscreen law. And it's interesting to know that Georgia is one of the states that does not have a sunscreen law, although their melanoma cases are double that of Alabama's. And thank you for that. If you have any questions, you can always reach me at the email address at carol.garrett@adph.state.al.us. Now, you have handouts available that were given to you prior to this presentation. So we want to go over your sun safety IQ. Skin cancer can almost always be cured if it's found early. That is actually true. The most common types of skin cancer, they can almost always be cured in its early stages when they're small and have not spread. Skin cancer is by far the most common type of cancer in the U.S. That is true as well. According to one estimate, about 5.4 million cases are diagnosed among 3.3 million people. And the reason that number is the way it is because many people are diagnosed with more than one spot of skin cancer at the same time. Skin cancer is not something young people have to worry about. That's false. We mentioned that earlier. The risk of skin cancer, it does go up with age, but these cancers are even in younger people as well, especially young women. And again, we showed you that chart earlier. People with dark skin, they do need to worry about skin cancer. Everyone's skin and eyes can be affected by the sun. And although it's more likely to occur in light-skinned people, it's darker-skinned people of any ethnicity can be affected too. I can't get skin cancer because my normal routine, such as driving to work, doesn't include a lot of time outdoors. That's false. Brief sun exposures all year round can add to major skin damage. So be careful when you're outdoors during those peak times of 10 to 4. And when you're at football games, even if you don't get sunburned, you should still wear sunscreen. Many people think it's okay to get a sunburn now and then, but studies actually show that even occasional exposure to sunlight increases your risk. And also, another false statement, you can't stay in the sun as long as you want. The American Cancer Society recommends that you seek shade, limit your time in the sun at midday, cover up with the shirt, wear a wide-brimmed hat, and use broad-spectrum sunscreen. A sunscreen of SPF 30 would actually protect you more than one of SPF 15. And that smart sun exposure strategy is a combination of sunscreen, shade, and protective clothing. And in the second one, the most action that you could take is to move to the shade. While all three actions may help, getting out of the midday sun when the sun tends to be hottest is your best option. And should I wear sunscreen on cloudy days? Yes. Which is not a skin cancer risk factor? Skin color. And also, all people are at risk for skin cancer. We mentioned that again, and they're more likely to have sun damage as well. How often should you check for changes? Once a month. And the last one, using sunscreen regularly is one of the easiest ways to prevent millions of cases of skin cancer each year. That is true. So how did you do? I hope you did very well. We are so glad to be able to present this information to you today. Anytime you have questions, feel free to contact me here at Alabama Department of Public Health. And again, always practice sun safety and have a great day.
Thank you, Carol. Next, we'll hear from Captain Lee Persky with Montgomery County Sheriff's Department.
Good afternoon. I'm here to speak to you about traffic safety or safety at not at checkpoints, at drive-up vaccination points, or there we go, at drive-up vaccination points or COVID testing points, both of which any of these principles will apply to either one of those situations. So one of the first things that you need to look at when you're developing a program for these drive-up inoculation sites is to look at the population that you serve. Smaller communities, you may not require larger areas. Larger places like Birmingham, Huntsville, Montgomery, Mobile, you might have to have multiple areas or just larger places. They could be public venues, doctor's offices, clinics, hospital parking lots, whatever the case may be. But you need to look at areas of your community that will accommodate the population. And that might even include having multiple checkpoints or vaccination points, I'm sorry. So you need to find a facility that will facilitate a safe entry into and out of the area that you're going to be giving these vaccinations. You'll need room, a larger parking lot, room for prep area, tents, tables, whatever you need. And one thing you might consider is also lighting. You want to light up the area as best as possible. Now, most of you are going to be doing this during the day. If you do it, I realize that, Sometimes this might get into late evening hours, and as we get into the winter months, of course, it gets dark earlier. So you might want to consider portable lighting and things of that nature so that you can light up the area so the people that are actually administering the tests or the vaccinations can be seen. You don't want somebody run over by a car. One thing you should also consider is keeping any prep areas, break areas, record keeping areas, and things of that nature at the site at least 15 feet away from where your vehicular traffic is going to be. That minimizes the risk to your employees, to the nurses, clerks, doctors, whoever is giving these vaccinations. You don't want anybody getting run over. And then, of course, additionally, you have power concerns. This day and age, we're a computerized society, so a lot of these records are probably going to be kept on electronic devices. Those electronic devices will need to be recharged from time to time. So you might want to consider that. If it's a remote location, you can find quiet generators, things of that nature. And you might even be able to utilize the services of Homeland Security equipment for the generators and lighting situations. You would contact your local law enforcement agency for assistance with that. Setting up a checkpoint, we do this quite often for, you've seen the click it or ticket, or you drink, you drive, you lose campaigns. Those are some of the things that I've been involved in for the last several years with the governor's highway traffic safety units throughout the state. And so we set these up quite frequently, and you might even gone through one or two of them. But for this particular detail, you might want to consider having law enforcement officers at the entrance and exit ways onto the property where you're administering these inoculations or vaccinations, so that you can help facilitate the easy and safe flow of traffic into and out of wherever you're doing this. And then you might want to consider also having an officer close to the area where you're giving these, so if there are issues, if somebody panics or anything like that, you can have somebody close by. Now, officers are not going to get involved in the medical stuff, obviously, but just for safety and of your employees. I would also consider, obviously, you're going to have your own protocols for safety as far as health concerns are the glasses and masks and gloves and gowns and everything. But if there's any way you can find some sort of reflective vests for the people that are going to be standing close to the traffic, I would highly recommend it. It's required of us, of course, but we're standing in roadways when we do these, but I would highly recommend that you do that. And then signage throughout the area where these people are going to be driving up, just telling them to stay in their cars. Unless you feel there's another need, but if this is a drive-up vaccination site or a testing site, there's no need for people to get out of the cars. It confuses things, it slows things down, and then traffic backs up. Then you have traffic issues out on the highway that could cause wrecks, and so we want to minimize all of that. One last thing is as you know, there are a lot of people who have a fear of needles. My children, every single one of them, are deathly afraid of needles. And if somebody's in a car and they're at a drive-up vaccination site, you want them to put that car in park, because if they panic, they let their foot off the brake and hit the gas, no telling what's going to happen. It could hurt people in the car, people outside of the vehicle. So make sure that the personnel who are administering these tests or shots walk up to the side of the car. Do not get in front of the car. Don't go between the cars. People panic. People forget things. People accidentally take their foot off the brake, whatever, and that leads to a higher risk. So just common sense safety and safety practices will help prevent a lot of problems that you might encounter. And I would recommend also that you tell people when they pull up and you tell them to put the car in park, that you tell them not to drive off from that area until you've instructed them to do so. Now, I've also done a little bit of research with this, very little research with this, and I looked at some of the OSHA regulations, and I saw, or excuse me, not OSHA, the CDC, And I saw that there's some consideration that there may be some wait times after shots are given and things of that nature. So if that is the case, you're going to need a bigger area to conduct these. But that's something that you can work on. Different factors require different results and different engagements. So I would consider having a larger area if you're going to have people stop and wait for a specific amount of time, because traffic is going to back up into the highways. Utilizing your local media is a good idea. Put the word out, social media, news sources, get the word out, let people know what you're doing, let people know what the times are going to be, and encourage people to come by at their convenience, but during those times. And that'll help avoid some of these other issues as well. Again, never approach a moving vehicle. Always look and see what's around you. It's always a good idea, no matter what you're doing. Even if you're doing this, or you're just walking from the mall to your car in a parking lot, it's a good idea to do that. More so with this. People are going to be nervous. People are already nervous about coronavirus and the ramifications. So you're going to have to be more attentive to what's going on. Some other considerations that we utilize on these checkpoints are communications. Communication. You've got to have communication. If you don't have it, things will break down. One simple thing for you to do is to go to one of your box stores and get one of these FRS radios. There's one pictured on the slideshow there. They're relatively cheap. You can get them for usually $10 to $20 for a pair of them. Don't require any licenses or anything like that. You buy a few of them. Your staff can have communication with law enforcement. Law enforcement can have communication with you. If things happen, you can call other people out there if you need to. And it's a huge benefit, and I would highly recommend that you get these if you're going to do some sort of drive-up vaccination or testing. Documentation, if you're going to have nurses, I would imagine nurses or doctors are going to be giving these vaccinations. I would have additional personnel if they have to fill out forms, have them fill those forms out prior to getting up to the nurse. Cuts down on time, again, cuts down on backed up traffic, and you can of course leave that form with them, and then they can give that to the nurse or doctor when they get up there to get their shot. That'll help facilitate the process and lessen the chance of any issues. And then lastly, I came up with a little diagram of a checkpoint area. You see the police cars at the entrance. At the very top, that's the roadway and entrance into the parking lot. And then you can divide it up into two or more, or leave it at one, depending on your population again. Lanes of traffic with signs up there to, stay in your car, instructions on what to do, where you can put what we would determine to be a command post, but a post for your records and record keeping and power sources. And then lastly, a place that if somebody has a reaction to the shot, they're going to need some sort of medical assistance, a place where you can take them. If that occurs, I would highly recommend that you call a law enforcement officer over there. You're going to have to, especially if it's the driver, you're going to have to treat that person by taking them out of the car, and the car is going to have to be moved. So most law enforcement officers will come over there and help you with that. Just move the car, park it, bring you the keys, and they're done. But I would recommend that you use them. Now, some agencies may or may not be able to help you with these details with on-shift personnel, staffing resources and things of that nature might prevent that from occurring, so you might have to hire off-duty officers to do it. But either way, most law enforcement agencies around the state would be more than willing to help you do any of the things that you need to do with these checkpoints. Excuse me, bad terminology, not checkpoints, drive-up vaccination sites. So if you have any questions, feel free to call me. My email address is up there, leepersky@mc-ala.org. It's LEIGH. And then my direct line in Montgomery is 832-7778. Feel free to call me and email me if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Persky. And lastly, we'll hear from Kenneth Harrison with the Alabama Department of Public Health.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me today. I'm Ken Harrison. I'm the Workforce Development Program Coordinator, and like many of you have probably worn a different hat over the last few months, I've also been coordinating the COVID-19 call center. Well, today we're going to talk about dealing with difficult people. Have you ever wondered why it's so easy to work with some people and maybe not so easy to work with other people? Well, we're going to look at the behavioral characteristics of what we may perceive to be a difficult person, and also how we respond to those behavioral characteristics. And sometimes if we're able to change how we respond, we can increase the effectiveness of those relationships. Well, being in the middle of a pandemic, we've all experienced stress beyond what maybe we've ever experienced in our lifetimes. Some of you might be spending more time at your workplace than any other place in your life, perhaps other than your homes. And I know on some days that you may be spending more time in your workplace. I've talked to many people here in the RSA Tower that have worked hour after hour. You might even spend more time in your homes, at your workplace than your homes. But with the amount of stress that we've been under, with the constant changing conditions that we see, and those challenging interactions we have with difficult people, which may even be increasing now. Understanding how it's so important that we understand now more than ever, probably before, how to deal with difficult people. And so the very first thing that we need to understand is there is no magical solution to changing another person. And that is so important. If we try to change someone else, we're going to most likely be ineffective. What we have to focus on what we can change, and we can change how we respond to others. So let's look at this. It's not about changing other people, but it's about changing how we respond to them in order to work effectively. So let's see what an effective person is. Effective people understand themselves and how their behavior affects another person. An effective person understands their reactions to others. Do you have someone you work with that you just might not want to be there when they arrive in the morning? Effective people know how to concentrate on what they do well. So what do they do with things they don't do well? They delegate off if they can. Effective people have a positive attitude. Now, when we have interactions with a difficult person, we respond in one of three ways. We either avoid the situation, change the situation, or we change our attitude. And attitude is a choice. That is such a key. But perhaps the most important is this last one. Effective people know how to adapt their behavior to meet the needs of others. I'm going to say that one more time. Effective people know how to adapt their behavior to meet the needs of others. So self-awareness is the cornerstone, and we all know what this cornerstone is. That's the main stone of the house. So self-awareness is the main stone of effectiveness. So once we start understanding ourselves, we can consciously control and adapt our behavior. So what's on the screen now, these are 4 different things that we can consciously control as we're dealing with difficult people. Our communication skills, listening skills, emotional intelligence, which we're going to spend a little time on, and a positive attitude. So let's look at all 4 of these individually. When we're in a face-to-face communication, and Captain Persky just mentioned communication. It's so important that when we're in a face-to-face communication, we communicate in 3 different ways: our verbal, visual, and our vocal. So, in other words, our body language, the words we say, and how we say those. Now, they're all 3 so important, and they have to work together to have the highest level of credibility. But of those 3, your body language, your verbal, and how you say it, which would you think lends the highest level of credibility? Well, according to Albert Morabian, who is a communication expert, 55% of our credibility comes from body language, 38% from tone, and just 7% from the words that we say. And I was surprised when I first saw that. I was surprised that words were only 7%, but keep in mind they all have to work together to establish the highest level of credibility. Now we're going to look at these individually. So what a unique opportunity we have to touch someone with something just as small yet as powerful as a word. An important part of communication is choosing the right words. Have you ever said something to someone and it was perceived totally different than the way you intended it? So ensure clear, effective communication, and if we don't, it can create a negative connotation. And we're going to look at a couple of examples right here. When we use negative language, these are some. How many of you have ever heard someone say, "I'll get back with you as soon as possible"? How does that make you feel? It makes me feel like I'm probably never going to hear from that person again. So what if they say something like, "Well, I don't know the answer, but I will get back with you by the end of the day"? I can live with that. I'm okay with that. A couple other examples is department policy. Now this next one, I don't know. How many I don't knows have we delivered over the last few months? Because we don't know. COVID-19 is something we've learned every single day. It talked about constant changes. We've had to deliver that "I don't know" so many times, so how are we delivering that "I don't know"? Make sure we put a positive connotation to it. We've always done it that way. I'll try to take care of that today. And probably the worst to me is "just calm down." You talk about escalating a conflict, and that's not my responsibility. So as we're going through our verbal communication, make sure that we think of how it's being perceived, because a lot of times we say things and we don't foresee how the other person is receiving it. So, okay. So we looked at the words we say. So how do we say those words? Our pitch. Our pitch is how high we say something or how low we say something. If we want to lower how we talk, we need to speak from our diaphragm. And our diaphragm, if you want to find out where your diaphragm is, when you go home tonight, lay on your back on bed, take a deep breath, and that's where your diaphragm comes from. That's where your diaphragm is located. If you know anybody that maybe has taken singing lessons, ask them, because most singers sing from their diaphragm. If you're in the studio here, we ask Brandon, because he has a great pitch, and you can tell that he speaks from his diaphragm. Inflection. We can completely change the meaning of a sentence just by emphasizing one word, even a syllable of a word. Rate. That's how fast we talk, how slow we talk. The average person speaks at 225 words per minute. Down here in the South, it's a whole lot less than that. So, including myself, because I can't even reach 225 probably. But the key is to mirror the person you're talking to. If you're talking maybe with the senior, then you might want to slow it down a notch. I don't know, the senior sometimes might be able to talk real fast. But in this mask-challenged world that we're in right now, be very conscious of your rate, because it's harder to communicate. We need to make sure we speak very clearly and at a good rate when we're talking. I was in a conversation with someone 2 days ago on the elevator, and we talked for a minute, and I couldn't tell you what they were talking about. They were talking so fast and not clearly, but just be very conscious of how we speak when you're on the phone. Also, maybe limit to about 2 words per second. The volume, that's how high we speak or how low. If you speak, or how soft we speak, I'm sorry, if you speak very softly, sometimes that can be perceived as maybe less confidence. If you speak too high, it can come across as bossy. Our diction. Diction is how we pronounce words. We want to make sure that we speak very clearly, again, in this mass challenge word. And also, if there's a word in your vocabulary that you struggle with, just get it out of your vocabulary. Choose another word. So I mentioned 55% of our credibility is established by body language, eye contact. Nothing shows someone that you're truly paying attention to what they say like eye contact. And when you're speaking to an audience like we are right now, make sure that you look around the room, you have eye contact throughout the room, and maybe hold it 1 or 2 seconds with everybody. Just don't look blankly into a room. Another thing is if you're asking questions, addressing an audience, if you hear nothing but crickets, nobody's answering questions, all you have to do is focus on that one person. Keep your eye contact. Eventually they're going to cave in and answer you. Thank you. Appreciate that. So, facial expressions. Be very aware of your facial expressions. Sometimes when we're listening so intently, we're concentrating, and that shows sometimes a confused look or maybe even an angry look. So be just aware of those. Posture. You want to have shoulders back, chin up, stomach in. That's hard to do after a big lunch. But when you walk into a room with a good posture, because that shows confidence. And there you go on that first impression. Very important. The handshake. I'm very confident we're going to be back to the handshake one of these days. When we do, we want to make sure we have that great eye contact, arms straight, firm grip, not too hard, not too soft, and no more than 3 shakes. Have you ever shaken anybody's hand that just either shakes it crazy, or either just that iron grip, or just maybe too soft, or the person that just won't let go, or even the power play where they just kind of roll their hand on top of yours? You can't really focus on what the conversation is because you're thinking, when is this person going to let go of my hand? So the elbow bump, jury's still out on it, can't help you there, but maybe keep good posture when you do it. Okay, so I love this picture. And I also love this quote by Stephen Covey. The quote is, most people do not listen with the intent to understand, they listen with the intent to imply. And this is so true because in our conversations we think ahead so many times. To truly listen to someone, we have to pay attention to what they're saying. Now, Stephen Covey was an author. He was also a motivational speaker, wrote many books, is probably most successful with 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And this quote actually came from one of his habits: seek first to understand, then to be understood. Great book. I recommend reading it. So let's look at some of those listening skills. The difference between hearing versus listening. Mr. Webster's dictionary, it says, hearing is the process of perceiving sound. Listening, the process of making sense out of what we hear. So let's look at some of the challenges we face, distractions. Now, as we're having conversation with a difficult person, especially if we know that we have an appointment, someone's coming in to the department or wherever you might be, your office, set aside a place that's safe, a place that's going to have no distractions, if any at all, no phones ringing, nobody coming up to you to try to talk to you. Be aware of exterior distractions as well, and also be conscious of things you might be doing. The clicking of a pen, rolling of your fingers on a desk. Just be very aware of distractions to have to engage in that conversation. Listening patterns. That's when we assume what's coming next. We all probably know someone that complains a lot. So naturally, whenever we have a conversation with that person, we're going to assume that the conversation is going to have maybe some complaining in it. So to truly listen to someone, we need to get that out of our minds and pay attention to what they say. The conversation in our head is louder than the person we're listening to. This is such a key. This is what Mr. Covey was talking about. I mentioned a few seconds ago that we can speak, the average person speaks at 225 words per minute. Well, we can hear at 500 or listen at 500 words per minute. That's 275 words. What are we doing with those 275 words? We're thinking, well, I mean, you might be listening to me right now, but you're thinking, what's for supper tonight? You might be thinking, man, Auburn and Alabama are playing this weekend. Can't wait for that. You might be thinking, what all you have to do the rest of the day. You might be thinking, you know what, that Ken guy is really a sharp guy. But whatever you're thinking about, why are y'all laughing? So what you have to do, the key is to drown out those 275 words. Do whatever you have to and pay attention to what they're saying. the myth of multitasking. Now, multitasking while you're listening is a myth. And I'm guilty as far as the next person, and I'm preaching to the choir. How many of you work emails while you're on the phone? So, are you truly able to listen to that person while you're working emails? Think about it this way. Have you ever had a conversation with someone that's face-to-face and they're texting while you're talking? Do you think that person is truly listening to what you're saying? So, again, just be very careful to make sure that we're not multitasking while we're engaged in the conversation. So, active listening, just practice. It's a simple 4-step process. We got to focus. We got to get rid of those distractions, drown out those 275 words. We have to show that person we're listening, have that great eye contact. We might want to do the occasional nod, or even maybe the occasional clarify. We need to ask those clarifying questions. Could you repeat that, please? And paraphrasing. If you're paraphrasing what someone else is saying, you're truly listening to what they're saying. Because think about it. You have to listen to be able to paraphrase. And when you paraphrase, it shows that person that you're truly listening to them. 4-step process. Please practice it. And we're going to talk about this in just a moment a little bit more. Emotional intelligence. So we could spend about a half a day talking about emotional intelligence. You know, sometimes when we're having conversations with difficult people, our emotions become involved. And our emotions become involved because we're triggered. Somebody pushes our button, right? So different people are triggered by different things. And sometimes when we're triggered, we experience something called neural hijacking. That is when a red flag goes off in our mind, the sirens start going off in our ear, red and white lights start going off in your head, your brain kicks in, it reacts, it says something that we probably might have wished we hadn't have said, or not the response we intended, or we might have said something to escalate a situation. And what happens there, it happens when we're triggered, we can react in a split second, and that's actually in 1/125th of a second. And it happens so fast that the part of our brain that the thinking, processing part of our brain, our cerebrum, doesn't have a chance to comprehend what's happening. So the good news is we can practice responding when we're triggered. And on the left side of the screen, you can see the person. If you're triggered, your buttons are pushed, your emotions come out, your brain is neural hijacked, and then we react. We say something we wish we might have said differently. So the desired situation is we're triggered. Someone pushes our button, but then we stop. We take a deep breath, and then we think, what do we want the outcome of this conversation to be? You formulate a response and you give a response. It's a lot easier said than done, but I had a friend that I used to work with, and I always noticed his face would turn real red in conversations, and he would kind of nod himself out of a conversation and walk away. And one day I asked him, I said, what are you doing? And he's, well, in the past, I've put my foot in my mouth quite a bit. I've reacted very harshly in a way that I wish I would have changed my response to had a more productive solution to that conversation. And he says sometimes it would take him a half a day to get back, but he would get back and respond. Now, I am not saying take a half a day, but take a moment. Take a moment. Next time you feel your emotions starting to rise, you're triggered, take a moment. Don't let your brain be neurally hijacked. Let the cerebrum do what we're paying it for, to comprehend what we're saying and think out that response and formulate your response. So practice this, in the future. Next time you feel like you're being triggered, take a moment and breathe. So it's hard enough to control our emotions. How do we diffuse that other person, that difficult person's emotions? So when we're engaged in conversation with someone, that person is experiencing just a high level of anger, or maybe sadness, or maybe frustration, or some intense type of emotion. Very little of their brain is working with logic. So when that emotion is so high, the logic is low. And if you've ever been engaged in a conversation where they have intense emotion, have you ever tried logicking them back through that emotion? It just doesn't work. So what the key is, and what's on the screen right now, is what we call the logic emotion cube. And as you can see, there's equal amount logic and equal amount emotion. And just picture that as your brain, so to speak, your rectangular looking brain. So as we engage with someone, and they might walk in the door and the emotions are already flared, but if we're talking with someone and their emotions are extremely high, the larger the emotions get, well, the cube's not going to get any bigger. What happens to that logic? It starts getting pushed into the corner. The larger the emotion is, the less logic they have to deal with. The key is to center the logic emotion cube. And once you're at that point in time, they're able to have a conversation with you and help start working on solutions. But to do this, you have to recognize that emotion. You have to calm it down before that logic starts making sense. And how do we do that? So first thing we do, we deal with the emotion. We have to let that person vent. Now, I am absolutely 100% saying that you do not have to sit there and be verbally abused, and we do not. And we're going to talk about that here in just a moment. But you have to let that person talk through their emotions. And as they do that, and we can, how we do this process, we talked about active listening a minute ago, and it is so important. This is where you use your active listening. You have to let that person vent. Have you ever been so upset about something that you're just not thinking straight, and you have to get it off your chest? And once you get it off your chest, you're able to start having a logical conversation, and that's what we have to do. But the first step is to let that person vent, and we're walking that person through the process. We have to understand or acknowledge their feelings. And when we do that, we do not say, I understand how you feel, because we don't. Nobody truly understands how another person feels. But you can make a comment, well, I see that you're extremely upset about this, or just acknowledge their feeling. You know, I'm sorry to see that you're upset. Just acknowledge that feeling. But the most important thing that we do when we're helping them lower their emotions is that active listening skills. We have eye contact, great eye contact. Show them that we're listening. We also ask those clarifying questions throughout the conversation, and then we paraphrase. We can paraphrase throughout the conversation. Once you start doing this, this shows the person you're truly listening, and you're going to start seeing that emotion come down and down and down, and then that logic emotion cube is going to be centered, and you're going to be able to help them develop a good solution. You're going to be able to have a regular conversation, and you need to explain. What you will do is follow through. Now, a couple weeks ago, I received a phone call at my desk, and I have no idea how I received the phone call, but I was the third person they had talked to. They had been passed around through different people in the department. And when they called the department, they were already frustrated when they made the first phone call. By the time they got around to me, they were hotter than a firecracker. And it was a parent that has a son who had just received a quarantine issue. The son was a senior in high school and played football, and he had a football game to play on Friday night. And the son had just received a quarantine issue. And the parent was extremely upset because according to the parent, who was a very good athlete, and he was on the verge of getting a college scholarship. And that by our quarantine issue, that we were going to prevent him from going out and play in front of these scouts and prevent him from getting a scholarship. So, of course, I practiced my active listening skills with this person. I was on the phone, so I couldn't give the eye-to-eye contact. I acknowledged his frustration, but then I started asking those clarifying questions throughout the conversation. I started paraphrasing what he was saying, and I started noticing those emotions were coming down and down and down. So eventually, we were at the level where his logic emotion cube was squared, and I was able to have a logical communication. So I was able to explain the isolation and quarantine guidelines. The answer was still no. No, his son could not play in the game that Friday night. But it was how I was able to deliver it, because he was at the level where he could logically talk. And, we also talked about other things, the scouts coming to the game, they're living in the same world we are. They understand, that some of the players that they're to scout are being quarantined. They have film they review from the coaches. They talk to coaches. They are able to come to other games. But he was able to have a logical conversation, and he even apologized to me, saying, "Ken, I'm sorry. I was so angry when we started talking." He said, "Thank you for your time. I understand." So, again, it's a hard process to do, especially when someone comes off at an extremely intense emotion. But practice active listening skills and keep thinking about that logic emotion cue. That is such an important thing. And I think that is the person that I talked to on the phone. So, what do you think would have happened if I told him, just calm down? I think he would have received a fourth phone. We would have received another phone call, and it would have been to my boss. Or do you think I could have logicked this person right there through their emotions? No, I absolutely could not. So, what I've done, I've listed just several popular characteristics of difficult people, and the list goes on and on and on. And what is a difficult person for me is going to be a difficult person for someone else. But there's so many. But number 5, worsens with conflict, is consistent across the entire board. And that's where, again, we have to lower those emotions and get that logic emotion cubes centered again. So number 5 is consistent. Some others, a lot of people like to blame others. A lot of people like to gossip. That should have been in my top 5 right there. So I have put together 10 different personalities, and I know that we're probably pushing it on my time limit, but so what we're going to do on all of these, I've listed these personalities. We're going to go through these, take a couple minutes to look at each one, and there are so many different personalities. And these are just some I put together, and what they do, a list what the personality is, the characteristics of that personality, how to deal with that personality, and also what our goal should be with that personality. And I'm going to throw a plug in here for myself right now. In 2021, I'm going to be rolling out a class called Dealing with Difficult People. And we're going to look at these among many other personalities. Just be on the lookout for that class in 2021. And it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to role play some situations, going to get out to all the districts, and we're going to have fun. So, but just be on the lookout for that in 2021. Thank you for the plug there. So let's look at the first one. Okay, the intimidator. They want to control by intimidation. They come across as confrontational. So this is the person that comes to you, and you give them a solution, but it's not the solution that they want to hear. They want to talk to your supervisor. So they go to your supervisor gives them the identical solution that you gave, and they're okay with it with the supervisor. And the reason being is because they respect the position. The key to intimidator is to gain their respect. And you gain their respect by standing up to them, and that's in a non-confrontational way. That's the key. You can stand up, but how you stand up to them is let them know that you're the person can help them resolve whatever issue they might have. I'm the person. It doesn't need to go any further than me. I'm going to help you do it. The know-it-alls. They never met a problem they don't know how to solve. Even if they don't know anything about it, they're the person that's going to fix it. So with the know-it-alls, they can be very argumentative because they don't like to be corrected. Don't take it personally. They don't mean anything towards you. It's their behavior. But with know-it-alls, one thing we can use is flattery because they love attention. Flattery helps. But the key and your goal for know-it-alls is to help open their minds to ideas. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by asking a lot of questions. So say you know a know-it-all, or maybe someone comes in to the Department of Public Health and they're a know-it-all. Well, this is the only way right here. Well, they're looking at solution A, but we know what's best for them is solution B, right? So how do we get them to solution A and solution B? We ask questions. We ask questions that will drive them to help them start developing the answers to solution B. In other words, by the end of the conversation, they're thinking that they're the ones that have developed solution B. They take ownership of it and they accept it. Know-it-alls. Toxics. Now this very manipulative person, this might be one of the worst in my opinions. They never apologize. Thing about toxics, we don't want to let them draw us in, resist the urge to jump in when they start complaining about someone. You can make a comment, something to the nature of, I'm sorry you feel that way, and just leave it at that and move on. You have to set boundaries for what you will tolerate and what you will not tolerate. Especially if they start mocking coworkers. This might be an internal. If someone starts mocking coworkers, a simple statement you can make is, I'm not interested in this type of conversation, and move on. And guess what? They will move on because you have taken the fun out of it for them. And when the fun is gone for them, they're going to move on and look to talk to someone else. Explosives. This is the man that I talked to that was pointing his fingers at me about his son. Again, this is the key here is just we have to center that logic emotion cue. I'm not going to spend much more time because we've already looked at that one. All right, the negativist. Maybe that's a word I need to get out of my vocabulary. The negative person. So this is the person that glass is always half empty. When we see this person, we come up with a big old serving tray of cheese for that wine. So don't buy into their negativity. Be a champion of positivity. You know, what we can do in conversations with someone that's negative, you know, we acknowledge their comments, but then we move on. They're going to want to talk about problems, but we talk about solutions. How we can help the negative people is asking questions that drive them to positive solutions. A couple of questions I wrote down. What are some good things that come out of that experience, or came out of that experience? Help them think about positive things. Another one, what would you like to see happen next time? And most people I know want to see good things happen in the end. But with negativists, don't expect big things overnight. We just kind of have to chip away at it, and we can do that by grinding with small gestures. Indecisives. Have you ever heard the term, you can lead a mule or a horse to water, but you can't make them drink? So indecisives have a hard time making decisions. With them, we want to help them with the how, the what, and the why. And the key is to help them visualize positive outcomes. What does that look like to you? It's kind of the same thing with the negative person, but we can really help the indecisive person is, especially if you're going to have a conversation with that person, think ahead of a time that you know something they did that resulted in being a good choice. And bring that up to them. Say, hey, Joe, do you remember that time you made this decision and just, man, we had this great outcome to it. So you can help build their confidence in themselves. Placaters. Placaters want to be liked by everybody. But you know what? So do most of us. But the difference is, placaters want to be liked by everybody to the extent that they say anything to pacify you. Now this is where it gets dangerous, because you think they're going to be accountable, but they're not accountable. You know, with them, they generally mean well, but they'll tell you just about anything to please you. So what we want to do with them is to encourage honest participation and just keep them focused on the actionable next steps. Socializers, these are the time killers. These are the ones that just love to talk. Imagine yourself, which your typical morning right now, you walk into your office and your calendar is slam full. You don't have a second to breathe all day long. Out of the corner of your eye, you see that socializer approaching your desk or you, wherever you are. You break out in a sweat, or you reach over to grab the phone, put it on your ear, and you just hope and pray that it doesn't ring while he's standing there, and walk on. That's the socializer. The thing we need to do with the socializer is simply time management. We explain to them, you know, I'm working on something right now. Can we set aside a specific time? An example, I could go, if a socializer walked up to me, I could say something, you know, I'm working on a project with Brent, but I really want to catch up. What about between 3 and 3:15 today? Now at 3:05, I'm going to have to start closing that conversation because they love to talk. But set a time, you know, they won't be offended if you say, hey, let's catch up between this and this. So that's what we need to work with socializers. The detached person, they want minimum involvement, and they might come across as wanting to be left alone. This is a very challenging person to deal with. Perhaps the best environment is in a group setting. Don't single them out, and just have them become involved in group projects. So it's a very sensitive personality to work with, but I would recommend a group environment. So finally, the micromanaged. They seem like they want complete control of everything. Letting go for them is hard to do. So how do we handle micromanagers? We got to prove to them that we don't need micromanaging. And what we do, we anticipate what questions they might ask us. We anticipate their concerns. And we also give them frequent updates. We're being proactive. And once we do that, they're going to build confidence in you, and they're going to think, well, you know what? Ken can handle this on his own. So we just have to help them loosen their grip. And these are a few questions you can say. You know, take ownership. Ask, you know, what does success look like to you for this project? You can ask, what are your top concerns we need to address? Or even, here's my plan. What gaps do you see? So with the micromanager, when we ask these type of questions, guess what? We become the boss, or we act like the boss. We're not the boss, but we act like the boss. And we do that, they're going to have confidence in you, and they're going to move on to the next person to micromanage, right? So I've just put together 2 pages, and what I just covered, those 10 different styles, are all in this presentation. You can download those, and also just put together probably about 10 or 12 professional and customer service tips you can review at your convenience. But I just want to, you know, take a moment, and if there's anything that you can gain from what I talked about today, are those things that we can consciously control, because those are what we have to focus on. Our communication skills, listening skills, and those listening skills, again, we use those in so many ways. Emotional intelligence. Think about, for yourself, to stop, to breathe, think about what you want the outcome of that conversation is, and then formulate your response. When we're dealing with someone else's emotion, we're thinking about centering that logic emotion cube. That is so important, because once we're able to do that, we can start a conversation with that person. And finally, positive attitude. If we keep a positive attitude, then we've done our best, and we're certainly going to end up in a better place. Well, I'm Ken Harrison again. I'm the Workforce Development Program Coordinator. Please call me if there's anything that I can do to help you. And to all of you, be safe and best wishes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ken. I do see that we have a few questions. This one is for Captain Persky. Is there anything that could be used or done for individuals with hearing difficulties when it comes to drive-up vaccination clinics?
Wow, that's something that I haven't considered, and we've not encountered on any of the checkpoints that I've been on. Hearing impairment, I would imagine you probably would, if you're going to consider that, just have somebody who has the ability to use sign language. But of course, if you don't have anybody readily available, then just a pad and a piece of paper and write things down, and hey, what is your question, and hand that to them, or hand them a pad of paper. With the COVID, you don't want to touch the same pen or the same paper, so just give them a pad of paper and ask them to write down their question, and then you can communicate that way. And I think that would probably be the best, the easiest way and most effective way if you don't have anybody there that knows sign language. And those people, somebody with a hearing impairment may not know sign language either. I would imagine there's a possibility of that too. So.
Thank you. And Ken, as the use of telehealth increases these days, can you speak really briefly to the importance of active listening and listening versus hearing, even between devices?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was actually, just prior to coming today, I was on a Zoom conference, and with you're speaking about telehealth. It's a challenge, and of course we have no eye-to-eye contact, but the questioning skills that you have, the active listening skills such as clarifying questions and paraphrasing, it's just important to show somebody that we're truly listening to them. And that's versus hearing, because in this day and age, we have again, we're mask challenged, and when we're face to face, it's hard enough to do it, but when we're communicating, telecommunicating, then it expands even more. And we really have to keep their focus, and when you're asking clarifying questions, that will help keep their focus.
We'll thank both of you also. Yes, we have a question from the audience.
Captain Persky, I liked your suggestion about nurses having reflective or safety vests when they're providing care around motor vehicles. But like for testing, they're often in a disposable PPE or protective gown.
Right.
Do they make disposable safety vests that can be purchased for nurses, that when they're taking off all their protective equipment, that can just be discarded and not have to be maybe disinfected or something?
Right.
Like that?
So, I mean, I obviously don't work in the healthcare industry, so I can't, I guess, intelligently answer that question. However, I did think about that. And I would imagine when you're using the PPE, do you change it every time that you interact with a person? So if I'm a nurse and I come to you and I interact with you and then I go to the next car, am I going to change that outfit?
Certain parts, like the gloves, would be changed every time, but like the gown,
not necessarily the gown,
or the N95 or the face shield.
Right. So, I don't know if they make that in the healthcare industry. or for the healthcare industry. If they don't, I think you and I need to copyright that and make it. Notice I threw myself in there, even though it was your idea. I would, there's several other things that you can do. And if you're not going to change that gown, I would suggest you just get some reflective tape and put it on there. It's not very cumbersome. You can tape it on the gown and utilize that, and it's probably a lot less expensive than buying the vests. The vests tend to be somewhat expensive, so $20, $30, $40 a piece, and I would imagine a roll of tape, 3M tape, is not going to be that pricey, and it's readily available. You can find reflective tape at Lowe's, Home Depot, any of the big box stores. People put it on their mailboxes and whatnot, especially out in rural areas. So that would be something I would suggest.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Thank you again. This concludes our program for today. I want to thank William, Carol, Captain Persky, and Kenneth for being here, and thank you for watching. Please remember that you can refer back to the training and resources anytime on demand. Have a great day.